This is the fifth lecture in our fall faculty lecture series on the university, presented by the Committee on Public Lectures. Many of our great universities in the U.S., both public and private, have, since World War II, come to have an appreciable fraction of their total budget consist of contracts and grants from the federal government. The money is necessary since, even as we know in the relatively generous state of California, the state money is insufficient to sponsor research for the faculty and their graduate students. Yet money brings problems. One kind if you don't have enough, other kinds if there is money. That is the situation to be discussed by our speaker tonight. Dr. Horace Magoun is Dean of the Graduate Division, Professor of Anatomy in the UCLA School of Medicine, and one-time Chairman of the Department of Anatomy. Dean Magoun has received many honors. He has been selected to deliver honorary lectures by the Harvey Society, the American Museum of Natural History, and the New York Academy of Medicine, as well as having been honored at UCLA as faculty research lecturer in 1957. In addition, he has received awards from the American Neurological Association, the Modern Medicine Award, the Squibb Citation for Distinction in Medical Science, the Borden Award, and honorary Doctor of Science degrees from Northwestern University and the University of Rhode Island. At this point, I'm pleased to call upon Dr. Magoun to discuss federal grants and the university.
I'll be with you in just a moment. Thank you, Dr. Savage. I think that every one of you who has been good enough to come out tonight should receive a federal grant for your special project. And if you will speak to me at the close of the talk, I will use what very little influence I might have on your behalf. I should like to open this subject of federal grants in the university with UCLA as an example of the prevailing relationships between the government and our outstanding universities in this country today. In the past fiscal year, this campus received, in addition to the general state-supported appropriation, a total of $33.5 million for research, advanced training, and related public service. Of this $33.5 million, 90% was derived from federal agencies, and almost two-thirds came from just 4 of them, concerned with health, basic science, atomic energy, and space. At UCLA, about 94% of this large sum was expended in research and training in the natural sciences and their health and engineering professions, 5% in the social sciences, and 1% in the arts and humanities. 10 years ago, UCLA's annual extramural budget ranged between $3 and $4 million. Today, it is multiplied by a factor of 10. The great current acceleration of the scientific revolution, coming from such federal support to the universities, has drawn commentaries from a number of reports and university spokesmen. Don Price of Harvard has remarked, just 2 decades ago, federal support of science in non-federal institutions was a distant dream. Today, it is an established habit. A recent Foundation report has exclaimed, "We are moving with headlong speed into a phase of man's long struggle to control his environment, a phase beside which the Industrial Revolution may appear a modest alteration of human affairs. Hunter Dupree has aptly said, "The mighty edifice of government-supported science dominates the scene in this second half of the 20th century as a Gothic cathedral dominated a 13th century landscape." In the words of Mr. Edward Carter, chairman at a recent meeting of our Board of Regents, the University of California is rapidly becoming a federal university. Well, what is the background of these federal grants for research in the sciences and the impact of their recent rapid growth upon the university? Two precedents in the 19th century established this present pattern of federal grants. As early as 1830, our government made a grant to the then just established Franklin Institute in Philadelphia to determine conditions under which steamboat or locomotive boilers exploded. With solution of this pressing problem of the age of steam, a more far-reaching step was the passage of the Morrill and Hatch Acts of 1862 and 87, establishing land-grant colleges in each state, among them the University of California, in which federal grants provided widespread support of research and extension education in the field of agriculture and some in the mechanic arts as well. This early federal support of institutional research came in response to national developments in transportation, industry, and agriculture, which collectively formed the chief expression of the Industrial Revolution in this country in the 19th century. The present situation can be traced quite directly, however, to the major federal support of research in science, technology, and medicine during World War II, and to further events as the war came to an end. On November 17th, in 1944, just shortly before his death, President Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote a letter which, in a sense, initiated development of the sweeping federal programs currently interrelating the government and universities in our country. Except for Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, classic and important documents of American history rarely get much of a hearing in our busy university and society. I should like to take a few moments now to present part of President Roosevelt's letter, addressed to Vannevar Bush, who before the war was professor of engineering at MIT, and to quote briefly also excerpts from Bush's subsequent reply to President Truman, Roosevelt's successor, on July 5, 1945. I hope that you will give their words attention, for like messages in a crystal ball, they blueprint most of the developments of the next 20 years in tonight's subject. President Roosevelt wrote, "Dear Dr. Bush, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, of which you are the director, represents a unique experiment of teamwork and cooperation in coordinating scientific research and applying existing knowledge to the solution of technical problems paramount in war. Its work has been conducted in the utmost secrecy and carried on without public recognition of any kind, but its tangible results can be found in the communiques coming in from the battlefronts all over the world. Someday the full story of its achievements can be told. There is, however, no reason why the lessons to be found in this experiment cannot profitably be employed in times of peace. The information, techniques, and research experience developed by this office and by the thousands of scientists in the universities and in private industry should be used in the days of peace ahead for the improvement of the national health, the creation of new enterprises bringing new jobs, and betterment of the national standard of living. New frontiers of the mind are before us, and if they are pioneered with the same vision, boldness, and drive with which we have waged this war, we can create a fuller and more fruitful employment and a fuller and more fruitful life. Bush's reply, probably one of the most influential reports ever drafted, began with a wonderful title, Science, the Endless Frontier. Its preamble was headed, Scientific Progress is Essential. Its text began, Progress in the war against disease depends upon a flow of new scientific knowledge. New products, industries, and more jobs require continuous addition to knowledge of the laws of nature and its application to practical purposes. Similarly, our defense against aggression demands new knowledge. This essential new knowledge can be obtained only through basic scientific research. Without scientific progress, no amount of achievement in other directions can ensure our health, prosperity, or security as a nation in the modern world. Bush's report concluded in a chapter called The Means to an End. The federal government should accept new responsibilities for promoting the creation of new scientific knowledge and the development of scientific talent in our youth. In discharging these responsibilities, federal funds should be made available. It is also clear that the effective discharge of these responsibilities will require the full attention of some overall federal agency devoted to assisting scientific research conducted outside of government. Such an agency should furnish the funds needed to support basic research in the colleges and universities. It is my judgment that the national interest in scientific research and education can best be promoted by the creation of a national research foundation. Bush and his committees, of which, incidentally, Clarence Dykstra, then provost of UCLA, was the only representative of the University of California, proposed that this agency consist of three main divisions: a central division of natural sciences relating to basic research, on one side of which was to be a division of medical research relating to the interests of the health professions, and on the other, a division of national defense relating to those of technology and engineering. Bush was convinced that these new functions should be centered in one agency. Science, he said, is a fundamentally unitary thing. Separation of the sciences in tight compartments, as would occur if more than one agency were involved, would retard and not advance scientific knowledge as a whole. In many respects, these proposals of the Bush report appealed to the principles of our 18th century democratic Constitution. They embodied the strong faith of the Enlightenment that reason and science, freed from earlier definitions of traditional values, would advance the cause of political freedom and social well-being in our nation. The report's emphasis upon the centralization of these activities in a single foundation, like more recent proposals for the establishment of a single Department of Science in our government, conflicted strongly, however, with the concepts of individual initiative and competitive free enterprise, which are so distinctive of our democratic credo. As it turned out over the next 20 years, the goals of the Bush report were achieved, not as proposed, but through the multiplication and dispersal of governmental agencies, as well as by the decentralization rather than the concentration of decision-making responsibilities, in much the same pattern at the macroscopic federal level that now seems to be developing within the only relative microcosm of the University of California. The Central Division of Natural Sciences in Bush's proposed National Research Foundation was met by the establishment in 1950 of an independent National Science Foundation. The Division of Medical Research of the Bush Report gained expression in continuing expansion of the already existing National Institutes of Health from 1946 on. Instead of a single division of national defense, an independent Atomic Energy Commission in 1946, and another independent National Aeronautics and Space Administration in 1958 were added to the already existing units of the Department of Defense. The support of advanced education in science-related fields was met by the duplicated fellowship programs initiated in each of these agencies. With the great further increase in scientific and technological effort in this country, following the advent of Sputnik in 1957, the need for coordination of these multiple agencies was met by the establishment of a Federal Council for Science and Technology, with the President's Special Assistant for Science and Technology as its chairman, and with a number of presidential scientific advisory committees, each making their recommendations. On this Federal Council were representatives from the then 8 governmental agencies which administered over 95% of the national budget for science and technology. This organizational pattern of multiplication, dispersal, and decentralization of federal agencies had the value of providing for, through open-endedness, for the expansion or addition of other agencies to meet new needs as they might appear. And two present developments have been the great recent expansion of the U.S. Office of Education and the establishment of still another independent agency, the National Foundation for the Arts and Humanities, with characteristically distinct compartments for these related but sometimes uncongenial bedfellows. In summary, then, this exceedingly large and rapidly developing federal support of university research that has occurred in our country in these two brief decades of the mid-20th century developed directly out of quantum jumps in the scientific revolution, resulting from World War II programs in atomic energy, radar, and penicillin, along with accompanying the orbiting of the first satellite into space in 1957. In fiscal 1965, that is right now, the federal government is supporting research and development in this country with some $16 billion, about $2 billion of which goes directly to the universities. Whenever any program grows to a certain threshold of dimension and complexity in this country, as witness our University of California today, our democratic unconscious begins to stir and concern develops about the interrelationships of its and other goals and the preservation of balances within its activities. This program of federal grants to the universities is no exception to this generalization. Although the dispersed nature of its growth from multiple agency bases has obscured until recently the collective magnitude and implications of the program. The dam has broken recently, however, and we are now in the midst of searching scrutinies of many features of this program. Attention is presently directed to the cumulative difficulties that have developed both outside of and within the universities. Extramural imbalances relate to the great concentration of these grants at a few large institutions in a limited number of geographic areas, as well as to the impact of their activities upon the economy of the regions in which they are located, and perhaps to an even greater degree, the lack of it in intervening parts of the country. Intramural concerns relate to the differing orientation of goals and of universities and federal agencies, as well as to strains on the relationships of university administrators and their faculties, imbalances between the faculties in the sciences and those in humanistic fields, and as well as difficulties between faculties and students as these relate to emphasis upon research and graduate training versus undergraduate education. To consider these, some degree, seriatim, in the tradition of wartime research policy, the federal agencies have tended to view universities primarily as places where administrators can find brains and other resources useful to the accomplishment of agency missions. As a corollary, funds have gone in major part to centers of research and graduate education whose competence was already established when the government began to provide large sums for research. As a result, there has developed a marked geographic imbalance in the distribution of federal grants in this country. Of the approximately 2,000 American colleges and universities, which more or less qualify as institutions of higher learning, about 400 receive some grant or contract money from the government. About a third of the total federal research budget has gone, however, to just 10 of these 400 institutions. Relevantly, these grant about a third of the doctoral degrees annually and claim for their faculties about two-thirds of the membership of the National Academy of Sciences and a significant number of the Nobel awardees in science in this country. 20 of these 400 institutions obtain about 60% of the federal grants, and between 50 and 100, that is about 25% of those significantly involved, are awarded roughly 90% of all the money. The university research which the federal government now sponsors, though voluminous, is thus actually concentrated in a relatively small number of institutions. The impact of this concentrated federal support of their programs has not been limited simply to the universities themselves, but has spread additionally to the regions and communities in which they're located. As was suggested by Vannevar Bush's metaphor, Science, the Endless Frontier, the new programs of government-supported research have created novel developments within this country's economy. Some economists have proposed that only technological change based on 20th century research prevented the stagnation and stratification of our society after the closure of our geographic frontier. In their view, the finding that enormous amounts of research could be carried on for profit has been one of the most revolutionary economic discoveries of this century. The system of government research grants that developed following World War II, they imply, has come to be for the fields of science and technology in the urban settings of our society of even greater importance than the earlier federal system of support of agricultural research in rural social settings. Federal expenditures for the development side of research and development now amount annually to more than our government has spent on such activity in the entire interval from the American Revolution through and including World War II. This really big money is expended chiefly through industrial contracts that have been concentrated, like grants to the universities, in limited regions on our two coasts. Nearly 60% of these funds has gone to just 3 states, to California, which is far in the lead, to New York, and to Massachusetts. This process has also been an example of mutual attraction. Contracts have gone to those states and communities where money, brains, and manpower had already begun to locate. Around the great science and engineering schools of MIT, Caltech, and the University of California have sprung up vast technological and industrial complexes, common to which are 3 main elements. The first is science-based industry, composed of industrial research and development laboratories and manufacturing plants employing a large percentage of scientists and engineers, along with supporting suppliers and services. Second, there is one or more major universities in which basic and applied research and graduate training in science and engineering are carried on, along with that in the management sciences and business administration. Third, there are federal research facilities operated directly by the government or under contract by universities or industry. The increasing degree to which these university-industry complexes have become a development of our times has been stressed by Lloyd Berkner with the comment, "I ask you to observe the new industrial complexes around Stanford University, where not many years ago were mere green fields. Or look at Route 128 around Harvard or MIT, or the aerospace industry around Caltech or UCLA, to see the portents of the future." Until recently, the have-not areas of the country have been slow to recognize the implication of these developments. But there is now an increasingly sharp awareness of industry's preference for locating new plants around lively and productive university research facilities, which both provide a pool of nearby consultants and serve also to attract employees who wish to continue their education. Midwestern governors and congressmen have recently become agitated by the growing brain drain, not from England, but from the Middle West, to such activities in other parts of our country. In Iowa, the 2 major universities estimate that from 55 to 75% of their graduates leave the state for their first jobs. The Midwestern states, in which the Big Ten universities are located, produce together about 40% of all scientists and engineers with advanced degrees. But this region receives only a small fraction of federal research and development funds. To utilize their training fully, many of these scientists must migrate, and their migration represents an economic loss to a region which annually spends large sums on higher education. Similar agitation can be observed in the Ohio and western Pennsylvania region, and in our south, middle and east south, along the Gulf from Texas to Florida, and then up the East Coast to the so-called Research Triangle in North Carolina. Emphasis is currently being directed to science-based industry by apostles of economic growth in almost every state in the Union. A new war between the states is beginning to rage. The battle is for new industry, and particularly for science-oriented new industry. If contemporary history is a guide, the proximity of federal grant universities with visible faculties, advanced facilities, and heavily supported research and training in the natural and social sciences relating to technology, engineering, management, and business administration. That is to say, the proximity of universities with the image of UCLA is likely to be the single most important factor that will determine which state or region wins. With all these extramural benefits resulting from federal grants to the university and agitation on the part of regional and state officials over the geographic imbalances so created, there is an increasing national concern over the limited total number of such institutions through the country, of which more later. A concurrent but differently oriented concern has also begun to develop within the universities themselves over features of the impact of these federal grants upon their own institutions. A prime example of such dissatisfaction relates to the imbalanced distribution of support in the several areas of university interest. Within major universities, hundreds of millions of dollars have poured into activities in the natural sciences and their health and engineering professions, and as mentioned, 94% of UCLA's extramural support is currently expended in these fields. A really reasonably balanced research effort in a university requires comparable activity in the social sciences and the arts and humanities as well. As Charlie Kidd has pointed out, however, neither the individual federal agency nor the government as a whole have had authority to operate as if Congress had enacted a law providing for general federal aid to higher education. In the absence of such a law, agency directors are responsible for administering laws which can be responsive to the university's needs only to a limited degree. The recent establishment of a National Foundation for the Arts and Humanities, as well as the expansion of programs of the National Science Foundation into the fields of the social sciences, is likely to improve the presently imbalanced situation. In addition, in the coming year, the University of California is initiating intramural steps to try to redress or begin to redress this imbalance. Its Academic Senate Committee on Research has recommended the establishment within the university of a Humanities Institute, which, without taking faculty away from their regular teaching, will provide 2-month summer research appointments together with funds for assistance, expenses, and travel related to research, as well as full-time income during sabbatical leave. To begin this program, the Regents have just appropriated $250,000 from their Opportunity Fund, which in turn is derived chiefly from overhead monies accompanying grants and contracts to the university from federal agencies. A second example of the imbalance and distortion of intramural goals relates to the university's educational program. As Harold Orland's Brookings Institution Survey has reported, within favored universities, imbalances have resulted between research and teaching, between graduate and undergraduate education, and within the motivations and aspirations of the faculty. Emphasis on research has accelerated the long-standing depreciation of undergraduate education at large universities, as well as the reduction of personal contacts between lower-classmen and faculty. Regardless of how little time they presently devote to undergraduate teaching, faculty members of every rank wish to reduce that time still further, although all groups wish to increase the time devoted to graduate education and to research. Undoubtedly, the sheer number of students and increase in size of classes have contributed more to the depersonalization of undergraduate education than has government action. But the government has abetted the process by the reduction in teaching on the part of so many faculty members. Graduate students, but not undergraduate students, are the main individual beneficiaries of all of the extra time faculty members now devote to research. In spite of these educational imbalances, however, there is no support for the thesis that the government has bought for science an undue proportion of our best young brains. Its vast expenditures have failed even to increase the proportion of either bachelor or doctoral degrees awarded in the natural sciences over the last 2 or 3 decades. It is the social and not the natural sciences that have gained from the relative decline in the number of degrees awarded in the humanities during this period. In a third direction, the predominant pattern of focal, individual, project-type grants from federal agencies has been accused of distorting the traditional prerogatives of the university of determining and directing its own, the directions of its own future growth and development. The individual project-type grant has recently been defended strongly, however, by a distinguished committee of our National Academy of Sciences, of which Professor Kistkowski of Harvard, a former president's scientific advisor, was chairman. This committee concluded, the commitment of large public funds for the support of basic research in universities has led not only to spectacular growth of the scope of scientific effort, but also to advances in quality. American science has reached a position of world leadership. We attribute this in no small measure to current emphasis on support by research project grants, coupled with an extensive use of advisory scientific bodies to select scientifically meritorious projects. We believe that research project grants should remain the backbone of federal policy. The emphasis on large programmatic ventures and laboratories in recent times must not lead to a loss of emphasis on individual scientists. The individual investigator has been and will remain the source of strength in American science. Nonetheless, something of a national debate on the merits of the project grant has recently developed. Charlie Kidd has pointed out that the extent to which decisions are negotiated directly between bureaucrats in federal agencies and professors in universities has tended to frustrate any joint attempts by agencies and universities to establish a system under which the federal government as a whole could view the research needs of the universities as a whole. In a similar direction, Christian Arnold states, despite the shift in the nature of the research needed, both the newer agencies and older ones continue to use the project system that had grown up during the war, by which the university itself is largely bypassed. Individual members of faculties submit proposals for research to the appropriate agency. These are reviewed by advisory boards of eminent scientists, and on the basis of their recommendations, awards are made or not. As the magnitude of the program goes, the cumbersome agency-to-individual operation becomes more difficult to manage. It contributes to the concentration of research in a handful of prestigious institutions, with money presumably following competence, and competence certainly following money. The fact that the advisory boards are drawn largely from the staffs of these same institutions raises questions in the minds of some about possible conflicts of interest. Others claim that the system discriminates in favor of the fluent, established scientist and against the shy, retiring, possibly younger one, who may be a better investigator. It tends to convert scientists with solid reputations into managers and lobbyists, effectively removing them from their laboratories, and tends to place a premium on their visibility in Washington. Perhaps of even greater importance, however, is the sort of relationship the system enforces between the university and the agency. This system erodes the university's authority while eliminating none of its responsibility. Psychologically, the scientist is working for the agency and not the university. In this way and to this extent, the university is reduced to a middle management operating arm of the various governmental agencies. The director of our National Institutes of Health, Jim Shannon, has recently spoken somewhat in the same vein. He reviews the advantages of the project system, which are much like as done by the National Academy of Science report, but goes on to say, but there are broad deficiencies in our current support system, and these become increasingly important as one takes a long-range view. One is the tendency to relate senior faculty members to the diverse sources of funds, diminishing their tie to the university in a fundamental sense. The university is now felt to be the scientist's boarding house rather than his intellectual castle. Thus, the concept of the university as a precious and necessary environment for scholarly activity has, to some degree at least, been lost. Yet strong, intellectually independent institutions of higher learning are indispensable national assets. There is need for a coherent body of principles which recognizes this point and provides a basis for intelligent, purposeful national action in terms of present and future demands for intellectual resources. At some point in our country's history, one might expect brilliant leaders to have come up with more imaginative plans for awarding millions of federal dollars to our universities than that devised in 1830 to stamp out boiler explosions in a 6-year-old technological institute in Philadelphia. Counterparts of features of the nationwide program of agricultural research in land-grant institutions following the Hatch Act of 1887 have in fact developed more recently in many of the agency programs supporting university research since World War II. One is the program type of grant, which provides a package of support for a number of related interdisciplinary activities, ongoing and more or less formally organized research units in an institution. NIH has been making such awards. NASA is initiating them in its space science centers. The AEC has such programs as, for example, that in the Laboratory for Nuclear Medicine and Radiation Biology on our campus. Another type is the regional laboratory, related to a consortium of associated universities, such as the AEC has established at Oak Ridge and Brookhaven in the east and Argonne in the Midwest. Still another is the Regional Primate Study Center program of the NIH, which, with an exuberant abandonment of all principles of regional planning, concentrated 3 of these centers in close proximity at the University of California at Davis, the University of Oregon at Portland, and the University of Washington at Seattle. There are going to be more primates in the Northwest than there are people. In another direction, a science development program has been designed by the National Science Foundation to establish new centers of excellence among our developing universities. It has already been accused, however, of moving so cautiously as only to strengthen a few lagging departments within already important research institutions. As William Trombley has recently pointed out, no one is quite sure what a developing institution is. When federal money is being awarded, many educational institutions may describe themselves as developing, while in other circumstances they like to leave the impression that they predated the discovery of fire. Nonetheless, it was a pleasure to learn just 10 days ago of a National Science Foundation Science Development Grant of $4.5 million to our sister University of Southern California to house and support a Center for Solid-State Sciences, a science engineering library, and facilities for undergraduate instruction in physics. In still another direction, in recent years, several steps have been taken to design programs that grant authority to the universities as well as to impose responsibility upon them. The National Science Foundation has started an essentially unrestricted institutional grant program, but limits participation in it to institutions whose faculty members have already been successful in securing project grants. The National Institutes of Health has likewise initiated a general research support grant program, the enabling legislation for which was described by Director Shannon as the single most important piece of legislation for the institutes. Each of these steps makes valuable contributions, but even in aggregate, they don't provide an effective substitute for the redirection of policy in federal agency-university relationships. Again, Jim Shannon has recently stated, "Now if, as most people believe, the future of this nation, or certainly the course of its development during the last half of this century, will be determined largely by the effectiveness with which we exploit our intellectual resources, then certainly the present situation should give pause for concern. Our support mechanisms, in general, foster the early emergence and broad support of the individual scientist. The sprawl of agencies that are ready and willing to support the individual scientist are looked upon as protective devices that minimize the possibility of federal dominance. But I would add that, importantly, these same mechanisms tend to distort the university. I believe none of us would say that we can effectively exploit the intellectual resources of this country without strong universities, stronger even than they are at the present time, where the university world is characterized by the development of further centers of excellence rather than the simple continuation of those that exist today. I think that what we need, above all else, is a coherent set of principles purposefully developed which relate the federal government to the totality of our institutions of higher learning rather than to one of the special purposes of the university. I think that the time is very ripe for the thoughtful analysis of our situation and for more aggressive action on the part of those associations that should be looking out for the interests of our institutions of higher learning. This is particularly true now because a great deal of soul-searching is going on within the Congress and the executive branch. But I don't see in the developing dialogue, Shannon continues, any strong measure of broadly based philosophical concern from within the university world. I think we spent too much time in the past few years indicating what a fine relationship we have, and I think this is not entirely healthy. I feel that the relationship is good indeed and that it has been good, but my remarks are aimed at the point that this is not a basis for future development. We are at the present time at one of these critical periods of decision. Depending upon what decision is made, many great things can happen. As an instance of congressional concern to which Shannon alluded, a month ago, the Research and Technical Programs Subcommittee of which Henry Roos of Wisconsin is chairman, presented to our House of Representatives in Washington a report which began, "Our federal research programs on the one hand and the nation's goals for higher education on the other are in increasing conflict. While both research and higher education share the common goals of extending scholarship and developing the intellectual resources of the nation, the immediate interests of one are not necessarily those of the other. The first conflict is in the present use of scarce manpower. Scientists and engineers are indispensable to research and development. They are also indispensable as teachers in the expanding higher education system. Since their numbers cannot be greatly increased over the short run, too much diversion into the one means deprivation of the other. The second is a conflict between present use of manpower resources and investment for future manpower resources. Both programs gain eventually from a greater investment in education and training of future scientists and engineers. But research demands performance now. Investment to train manpower is necessarily of secondary concern. Education, by its nature, demands investment now in training young people so that the nation can have the benefits of performance later. Short-term research requirements may be satisfied by concentrating most of the science funds in a few excellent universities. But the long-run effects of such concentration could be disastrous for other colleges and universities, and hence ultimately for both research and for higher education. A third conflict arises because the demands of research and development are focused primarily in the natural sciences. But colleges and universities must transmit knowledge and encourage scholarship in all fields of learning, while maintaining a careful balance among the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences. The nature and extent of these conflicts must be understood if the federal government is to make headway toward the equally important goals of research and development and higher education. Neither more money for research and development nor more money for higher education will alone assure more of either. Indeed, these actions, unaccompanied by federal policies which balance the competing and sometimes conflicting needs of the two programs, will put them on a collision course and damage both. As an instance of national executive concern, to which also Shannon made reference, just 2 months ago, a memorandum from President Lyndon B. Johnson to the Cabinet and all federal departments and agencies began, "The strength of the research and development programs of the major agencies, and hence their ability to meet national needs, depends heavily upon the total strength of our university system. Research to further agency missions should be administered not only with a view to producing scientific results, but also with a view to strengthening academic institutions and increasing the number of institutions capable of performing research of high quality. To the fullest extent compatible with their primary interests in specific fields of science, their basic statutes, and their needs for research results of high quality, all federal agencies should act so as to A, encourage the maintenance of outstanding quality in science and education in those universities where it exists, provide research funds to academic institutions under conditions affording them the opportunity to improve and extend their programs for research and science education, and to develop the potentialities for high-quality research of groups and individuals, including capable younger faculty members. C, contribute to the improvement of potentially strong universities through such measures as giving consideration where research capability of comparable quality exists, to awarding grants and contracts to universities not now heavily engaged in federal research programs, and assisting such institutions or parts of institutions in strengthening themselves while performing research relevant to agency missions. In his memorandum to the Cabinet, the President stated further, "The purpose of the new policy statement I am issuing today is to ensure that our programs for federal support of research in colleges and universities contribute more to the long-run strengthening of the universities and colleges so that these institutions can best serve the nation in the years ahead." This, then, is the present state of the subject of federal grants and the university. Federal policy on this subject is beginning to take clear form, and I think the question that possibly could be asked is, can the same be said of the policy of the universities? Thank you.